fringe here. And we're going to need the whole planet. So if we want to bring together an economic and monetary alignment, because what we're doing is a reformation, are we building the tools that reflect enough people? Anyone ready to kick it off? This is the 30,000 foot. We're going to get granular from there.
Obviously a super heavy first question, so.
Yeah,
go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, we're trying to fight. And it is a war.
I can try to stab it first. I think a couple of things there is reflecting who we are, what we want to be, and then inclusiveness. And I think there you always kind of start with the why to reflect who we are and who we want to be. And I think the why, why we decentralize anything like the tech stack, it's because we want robustness, resilience, we want credible neutrality or verifiable impartiality. And I guess you can do that in a centralized environment, but I think history shows, whether it's a company, a country, an empire, that anything centralized continually becomes more powerful and more centralized and eventually topples. And so that is the resilience aspect. And then what does decentralization do in general? It allows you to not only increase that resilience and so on, but with things like DAOs, autonomous organizations, it allows you to use levers for incentives, and I think more importantly, disincentives to instill the right behavior and disincentivize the wrong behavior, to a continual experiment and not just leave it up in the hands of one, two, or a few people, which always happens because incentives drive behavior. And if you're leading a centralized organization, you're going to concentrate on your own incentives and not the world's. So I'd say super hard question. Thanks for starting out with that.
Yeah, I can add something. I can add a personal experience. So when you said that, the things that you're building, they sort of like reflect who you are. And when you look at what this industry has built, I can share a personal story that I think I've been in the industry for around like 10 years. And the time after the FTX crash and everything that happened last year, I remember a week in which I was talking to some friends from who were in crypto from early days as well. And it was the first time that we felt embarrassed to be associated with the industry, right? So imagine you work in the industry for like 10 years, and after putting in 10 years, you're actually like sort of like embarrassed to tell people that, this is what I do and this is the industry that I'm part of. And I think that was a very weird moment, right? Like I think we got over it. We got back to building that. I think we taking freedom technology and privacy technology to the world is a very, very important mission. But I do think that we should reflect back that what type of industry are we really building if people really feel that way.
All right, how do we get proud, Paul?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think it cuts really to the heart of, like you said, if the tools reflect who we want to be, it really reflects what world we want to be in. And I think ultimately, if you're living in a world that's like a corporate realist, a nihilistic long-term future, then everything you're going to build is going to be hollow and shallow. And if you have a vision of like the kingdom of heaven on earth, in some iteration, whatever that is to you, then you will be building amazing tools, even in their failing, are bringing about something wonderful. So really, it anchors in like eschatology really is the ultimate driver.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, you're building some stuff that makes us feel a little more positive, like regeneration.
Yeah. So basically, Gitcoin's primary product is a crowdfunding application that funds things according to the preferences of the median citizen, not just what the rich people want. And so, when I hear you say, like, we're building systems that reflect the organizations that they're deployed in, I kind of think of, oh, well, that might have been true in Web 2, in which you had Conway's Law applied to socialware in the organizations that you have in your organization. But now we have trustware. We can build decentralized algorithms for elevating the values that we do have. And I think that quadratic funding and Gitcoin grants is an example of programming our values into our money and building organizations that uplift the community's preferences. And so I'm optimistic about this technology and how it can be applied for public goods and regeneration.
All right, we got two left. Science, how does science feel about trust?
Well, I can start with another small story. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. For me, during the pandemic, it was really a crisis when it hit us. And we had therapies that could have saved lives, but there was nobody there to really carry that torch. And I stumbled into decentralization and the technologies that many of you are building. And that just completely turned me around. So I'm all about mainstream bridging to decentralization, because without that, I don't think this goes anywhere really. We need everyone in, the whole community. And I think the best place to start that is pharmaceuticals, because let's mention it's the most lucrative marketplace in the world, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And so I'm going to take a stab at trying to get community around the idea of developing drugs that everybody should have at a much more reasonable price. And we might already have them that are not, necessarily being used when they should be. And that's because of the forces. So I came into this whole world of decentralization out of necessity when people were dying. So please try to help me see how this can be worked into your system so that people can really get a benefit from this.
All right. Last but not least, can everyone hear us? Can we be louder? Okay.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, trust is it's about kind of relying on a source of data that is accurate and true. And I think this is where, living in this blockchain ecosystem, we're able to verify, activities, verify transactions, and that verifiability is a huge element of trust. So I think, being able to interact with someone on the other side of the world, whether it's through a DAO, through some sort of governance process or whatever it may be, being able to view that all on chain really gives you that, that warm, gushy feeling inside that, hey, things are happening in the manner in which they should be, and any kind of nefarious activity or anything of that nature can be found and can be kind of dealt with. So I think on chain, I think that's a key element to how we build trust in this community.
All right, Mark. I don't think you're on.
Reminder to turn my mic on, but
Yeah.
also please at any time raise your hands if you have questions, anything you want, anything you want to share. This is an interactive session. So
It is a reflection of you as much as a reflection of us,
Okay.
what we build. So
all right, and
without the
we have our
participation-
first brave volunteer,
Yeah.
sir.
All right. Bob Geyer, I'm a faculty member at Michigan State, and one of the things that we've been engaged in is open education resources, right? We develop a lot of curriculum. I've been an editor for our major journal, right? There's a lot in the publication space where traditionally what we've done is taken all that work, often funded by grants in the government, and then given it to textbook publishers. I hate that. I despise it. It bastardizes the work in many ways, right? Where do I find the partners to work with in building open education resource communities and open publishing communities? Because we're ready to go, right? Help me find the partners to help make that happen.
Well, we have two representatives from two different ecosystems. You guys want to fight it out on what tools? No, nobody wants to fucking fight? I want to fight.
Julie, language.
Oh, but that's
Come
the
to
only way
mo-
we're going to get people in.
As a fellow academic once, go to meetings like this, start talking to people, and build it yourself with your group of people. You can do it. It's not that hard.
Any other thoughts for this gentleman?
We got one up front.
Oh, okay. Back to you.
All right, Mark's going to come to you.
Question was, what do you need? What can anyone here do to help you? The doctor.
Help me.
Yes.
I think that'd be a good question for everyone here.
Join
Yep.
PharmaDAO Foundation. And then that is going to be a group, I hope, of 1 billion people someday that have control over a treasury that can be used for development of drugs that we need. And I'll tell you right now, Big Pharma won't do that. You know that, I know that. So this is an alternative. And I think the only way to do it is through decentralization. And I've said this before, it's your DAO. It's not my DAO. I just sort of thought of it, but it's really your DAO. And it's just like your treasury, the United States government is your money, right? Yeah, I know you don't believe that, but I don't think anybody here does. But it is true that it was intended to be that, and it never was, or maybe it was once, but not anymore.
I actually have an idea for you. You could do a jingle based on "This land is your land. This DAO is your DAO. This DAO is."
I
mine."
think that's an awesome idea, Mark.
Okay.
Thank you.
I bet
I
Chat
think-
GPT can
I
write
actually
it for
could play
you.
that on my guitar too. So that
All
would be
right.
good.
All right. Well, you got a plan.
I'd like to tackle that question, and not just from a graph standpoint, but from a Web3 standpoint. What people can do is not just talk about this space, but actually participate in it. And if you're building in the space, use Web3 tech. Use Unlock for registrations of events. Use Livepeer for streaming. Use DeFi. Get away from banks. Use decentralized tech stack infrastructure from oracles to blockchains to data indexing. Because right now in Web 2, there's a client-server relationship where whoever owns the server owns the data, everything, and controls everything. It can steal it from you, sell it mostly without your permission. And the only way to disrupt that is build on a decentralized tech stack and then build truly decentralized applications. If not, you're just building more Web 2 technology. And I mean that. A dApp is not a dApp without decentralized tech stack, and an app is just more Web 2 technology. So actually use Web 3 tech.
I just
Nice.
want to tag along in that as well. I think that was well said, Kyle. And when we talk about decentralization, I'm going to have a little bit of a governance slant here, but I think it's very disingenuous when a lot of DAOs say they're fully decentralized, because the stack isn't really decentralized. When you're using Snapshot for off-chain polling in a multisig, that's not truly decentralized. You still have a human in the loop who needs to execute, or a group of humans that need to execute a transaction, to execute a proposal, or what have you. I think we need to move towards truly decentralized governance systems. So, where the votes are actually happening on chain, and there are lots of different projects out there, or open source toolkits out there. As I mentioned, I work at Delve. One of the projects that we've open sourced and made available to the public is called Council. And Council is a full stack governance system with not just the smart contracts, but there's also a reference UI as part of the front end. There's an SDK, there's a deployment CLI, and it's really meant for DAOs to be decentralized from day one. So I think as part of that full stack of going decentralized, we really need to think about how we're evolving our governance systems as well.
We have a few more questions. Actually,
I
pipe in and then we'll.
I just wanted to add something on. I know we are talking a lot about the decentralized systems, but let's just double click a little bit on the word decentralized. I feel like in this industry, like, sure, we have a better understanding of what that might actually mean, but for things to actually go mainstream, people don't really care about if something is decentralized, right? So I think there's a way to talk to people to help them understand. Like, for example, if you tell them, do you want things to be fair? Do you want everyone to play by the same rules? Do you want things to be verifiable, right? Do you want more transparency? Nobody's going to say, no, I want less transparency in how things are working, right? Like, or you ask them that, would you like that, everybody plays by the same rules and it's not like someone gets better treatment than you? Is it about fairness? And people will be like, yes, like, I would like things to be more fair, because they have a lot of pent up anger where they feel like, everything's a black box. If you look at Wall Street, if you look at how, the Fed works, or how things are really working, and you tell them that we can make things more open, more fair, more verifiable. And I think that's where you click with people. That's where they sort of like understand like why decentralization sort of like captures it. But I feel like the word doesn't do it justice.
Question.
Okay, so here's an element of trust and a thing that we can do that seems important to me. Let's commit to having women on the panel, and not only moderating.
Am I not a woman?
You're moderating,
Here.
and you guys are all amazing. Nothing against you, but you, out of 6 men, there could be a woman. That's something I'd really like to see. You will all have more credibility if you mix it up a little, and that's what decentralization
I agree.
is about. So, okay, thank you.
I'm actually insulted. I feel like well, we'll get into that later. We need to transition into the parts of the parts to whole. Think about questions that are related to granularity in what we do. What are the things that need to get done?
Blocking and tackling. This gentleman.
Hi. So my name's Mosa. I'm still learning in this Web3 space, clearly. I was really brought on by the idea of decentralization. But I do want to ask you guys how you guys think FedCoin and CBDCs are going to actually influence the growth of this space when there are companies that are looking to cater to what the government wants, and then there are companies that are really looking to decentralize this space as we know it. Where do you see things realistically going, especially now that we've seen big crypto giants have been wiped off of the face of the earth since just last consensus? So just a realistic viewpoint. And if FedCoin could mean centralizing more of what it is that we're trying to do, but just under the guise of decentralization.
I definitely want to hear what Paul thinks about CBDCs.
Yeah.
Well, actually, surprisingly, obviously, I'm anti-CBDC, but I think an important tension that's important to our project is what we need to do is one thing, be patient. And I'm thinking about these tools in terms of like the tools that led to, say, the American experiment were like the printing press, but that was hundreds of years before. And various technological innovations, they take time to work their way into the system, and they express themselves politically. And I think what we're realizing is that the American experiment seems to be changing, and the whole liberal global empire seems to be collapsing, or falling apart or crumbling. And I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, I think you could be grateful for what it was. It was an amazing experiment. And I'm grateful for the American system, but I think tools like CBDCs could just prolong the worst aspects of the American empire. And I think I'm very hopeful that decentralization will be able to undermine those efforts and exist despite federal efforts to sort of monopolize the space.
Kyle.
I think it'll look exactly like the FTX experiment, which was shady, which was practically illegal, which was invasive, and it was manipulative, and it was the incentives were completely wrong. And it will probably get a lot of adoption, and the tide will go out, and either it will break down, or just like all the other centralized explosions last year, or it will, the people will rise up against it. And now DeFi has proven itself extremely strong. Nothing went out of business in the decentralized world, unless it was based on one person and their shitty moves in general. So I think it will be an experiment it'll probably get a lot of adoption. Governments will be doing, pushing adoption in general. And then people will see that their bank accounts are cut off because they didn't make the right decision, or they're jaywalking, or whatever it may be on CCTV, and you'll get cut off from whatever you're doing in your world, especially your bank account. And that will not only push DeFi, but it'll push things like Bitcoin. It'll push anything decentralized that enables personal rights and freedom and privacy. So I think that's the long-term game. And I hate to say that it will get adoption, but it probably will. And I hope it blows up hard for governments, even though it's going to be hard for a lot of people if it does, unfortunately.
Just really quick, you will always be able to get a bison steak at the Wagon Box without CBDCs, no matter what they push.
That sounds very tasty.
Come on out.
Hi, my name is Waqar Zaka. I'm a Pakistani and a content maker. Just would like to ask, why is it needed if you want to create something over a Bitcoin layer? Why a separate pre-mined token is needed? You can obviously do it on Bitcoin chain, like STX is a separate token. And next question is that with all the decentralization going on, there is no decentralized punishment. You can get scammers in India, Pakistan, Vietnam, someone is scamming you, and there is no centralized unit where you can report to get, some kind of punishment for the scammer. That is why the retail investors are getting really, all the corruption from the scammers. And the third question is, do you people feel that CBDC or at any stage, the digital dollar or the digital currencies will be backed by digital gold like Bitcoin, like government of America coming and saying, okay, listen, like before 1971, there was gold. How about on CBDC will be backed by how many Bitcoins America or China has? Thank you.
Well, I guess Muneeb needs to start with some of that, but I'm going to take punishment quickly. Shame still works. I'm not suggesting shame is good, but if you want to start with scammers, shame. Carry on with other questions.
I can take the first one, right? So I think in general, when you're building Bitcoin L2s, it could be stacks, it could be more federated systems, or some of the newer rollups projects that are coming. You're effectively making trade-offs, right? So you could have a federation where you're trusting a certain party for your Bitcoin to come from the L2 back to L1. Or you could have a more open system like Stacks, where there's a decentralized group of signers that could say, these are the signers who will get the Bitcoin back from L2 to L1. Or you could have a fully trusted bridge. Like you could have BitGo operate a bridge and plug it into a rollup, and you're fully trusting a single company that is operating that bridge, which is effectively how Wrapped BTC works on Ethereum, right? So these are all trade-offs, and I usually prefer open systems, more decentralized systems, instead of trusting a company or a federation.
I'll take the last two. The first one's quick. I don't think governments will ever back it by hard money because they can't manipulate it and make it fiat and use it as a source of control. The second is, why build a technology on another Bitcoin? Why is the graph built on Ethereum but uses its different token? And it's because of incentives. How do you get right now tens of thousands of people making up the backbone of the technology to incentivize people to sync, which costs money, to incentivize people to do the right things in the behavior? How do you do that with tens of thousands of people and eventually probably hundreds of thousands of people? You need good economic incentives, emotional incentives, and you need economic and emotional disincentives. And that's why in a POS you have slashing. Since there's a lot of GRT on the line, if somebody's participating in the network, you need that economic disincentive or they will game the system. So that, I think, answers your question, why you need a different token. There might be different mechanisms. We haven't figured them out yet, but it does work very well, and you continually improve on it. It's never done. Innovation is never done. It should never be done. But that's the reason why at least this ecosystem has.
Sir.
I love the question you opened with regarding the idea that we can't help but build ourselves into the products that we make. So I'm curious about getting a snapshot of the selves that are making it into the products that you guys are making. A friend of mine shared this question with me that I thought might be interesting for that, which is, what one book do you most frequently recommend or give to your friends?
I have one I would love everyone to read in this room, and I'm serious about this. It's called Sick Money. Written by
And when they say sick, they don't mean in the complimentary way.
Yes, but it's written by Billy Kinber in London, investigative reporter for the Times, and he did a review of the entire global pharmaceutical industry, and he wrote it in 21. And he started the research prior to the pandemic. So everybody in this room should read it, because guess what? It's not being heavily marketed in the United States, but did pretty well in Europe and Australia. So trust me on this one, it's a great book and really well written. That defines me as well, of course.
So many great books, but I know he catches a lot of flack in these circles, but Nassim Taleb's Skin in the Game and a lot of his books inform. The previous question was about scamming and scale. And I think it's important to realize, yeah, there's a lot of little scammers out there. The big scammers might take their time, but it stinks getting robbed every now and then, but it's governments that kill people by the millions. So when you think decentralization, it's much more anti-fragile. And so Nassim Taleb's thoughts on anti-fragility are baked into my thinking.
Yeah, mine was going to be anti-fragile as well, because decentralization is constantly second-guessing, constantly audited by tens of thousands of people, almost 100,000 Bitcoin, every single block, and that is constantly calling everything into question, and that leads to a better system overall with consensus as opposed to a small group of people deciding what should happen. So I think that innovation, which is constantly changing, constantly getting better, is the best leading indicator of survivability and thrivability of an economic system, of a company, of an entity, of an immune system. It doesn't matter. So we always have to be breaking things down, and that requires everyone in the world to constantly use a scientific method to see if it's the best thing on the market. So for sure, I agree with you.
Wait, how many people on this panel are banned on Twitter by Nassim? Just throwing that out there.
Hasn't blocked me yet.
Yeah. All right.
All right, mine is a light read. It's a classic. It's a Snow Crash.
Yeah.
And I think it's still a classic. If people go back and read some of the ideas in that book, even the idea of digital money, like Bitcoin, was sort of there. The metaverse, the term was actually introduced there. And I think it's just a classic people should read. Side note, like in the Stacks ecosystem, people are such big fans of it that there's an entity that's actually named after the main character of Snow Crash, Hero. And people should go and just read that book. It's amazing.
Any other read recs?
Radical Markets by Glenn Weil, Quadratic Voting, Harbinger Taxes, Data as Labor. My biggest hit, Gitcoin, is built on top of quadratic funding. And so Radical Markets is a collection of ideas for how we can build mechanisms that support the public good and democracy in the digital age. So check it out.
Last book choice.
Yeah,
I'll give mine in a second.
I think a common author, but the Sovereign Individual is a really big one. And I mean, it really hits home the point of decentralization and less reliance on the state. But I wanted to touch on one key thing that you mentioned, which is like, the things that we're building are largely defined by our own, core values and principles. And, I think inclusivity is a really important principle for this space. And a lot of it has to do with, if we think about DAOs and we think about the protocols that we interact with, and I'm going to take it back to the governance land, but, one token, one vote, I think that's a very legacy mindset. And as we look to the future, we need more inclusive governance systems that rely less on just how many tokens you have, but more on your reputation in that ecosystem, or maybe your participation. So if you're if you're someone in a developing nation, they may not have access or the means to acquire enough capital to be able to participate in that ecosystem with tokens. Maybe you're contributing code to the GitHub. Maybe you're active in the governance forums. Maybe you're active in on-chain and off-chain voting. That should be worth something. So I think if we can bring reputation on-chain and use that as voting power, so that individual can then have an impact on that ecosystem that they're actively contributing to, I think that's going to be a big step up in terms of inclusivity. And that's something that we're working on with partners, and there's a lot of other projects out there that are working on reputation systems specific to DAOs.
Well, Muneeb stole my answer, which was going to be Snow Crash, but I'm going to give you another Neal Stephenson novella. It's 90 pages. It's called In the Beginning, There Was the Command Line. It's really outdated, so you're going to get a little throwback nostalgia, but it is about how different levels of abstraction affect understanding, but most crucially affect adoption. And maybe Disneyland is a poor substitute for reality, but a lot of people learned about more cultures through, well, a wacky anti-Semite. So perhaps the further abstractions we go, the more inclusive we become, because then everyone can wrap their heads around something. And it's important that we bring in people that understand it at every possible layer.
It's a small world after all, as they say.
It is a small world after all.
Question.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Georgia. I'm a software engineer for Croesus. I think it's really interesting that you brought up Taleb's work as some of your favorite books, because in his book Anti-Fragile, he talks about systems that become stronger under stress. But also in his book Fooled by Randomness, he talks about how we can't actually predict which chains are going to be the most successful. I'd like to bounce that off of ideas behind like the Sackler dynasty and creating large systems of medical distribution that have complete vertical integration. In a coming world where we should see a transition of medical distribution and prescription distribution on the blockchain, how do you recommend creating secure chains that aren't going to allow like large whale type distributors to gain complete vertical integration of the system again.
I think a good step would be abolishing intellectual property laws, but that's kind of a
Spicy.
Muneeb, I think you'd have some really good ideas here. I would say that the more iterations, the more failure, the better. So the more simulations we go through, the better data we'll have. And as long as we live in an open source world, that continues innovation as long as somebody doesn't silo from what has been good in the past. Because there's so many different good things, a lot of really bad things, and even in the really bad things that happen, there's so much to learn. So I love this open source world because it opens the Cambrian level innovation floodgates, and we're better because of it. We're innovating faster than we ever have technologically as a species. But I know you'd have some points there.
No, I like your point. Like I personally am more on the Bitcoin side of things, but I'm not one of those people who's going to hate on all the other experiments that are happening outside of Bitcoin, precisely because those experiments have really deep learnings for the Bitcoin ecosystem as well, right? So if Bitcoin is hard to change and it is sort of like the largest capital pool, you can go and experiment in much smaller systems and things can fail, there can be learnings, and eventually those changes can actually come to the more larger, more stable ecosystems as well. So I think this type of like Cambrian explosion of experimentation actually makes everything stronger in the long term.
Muneeb, I would just like to point out that your comment is an attack on Bitcoin.
That's why decentralization is important so that we're not blocked. We're not blocked on innovation, because if there's a way and a choke point on the tech stack, the financial rails, or whatever it may be, then people, corporations, governments will do that because their incentive is to have competitive castles with competitive moats, squash competition, squash innovation so they can own and control their market. Markets for governments is obviously their people and country, same thing for companies. So decentralization is by far the most important primitive to be able to continue this experimentation freely.
Can I swear again, Mark?
You may.
It's important to fuck around and find out. So what are we doing to fuck around and find out?
Is that rhetorical or?
No, specific. We're still in the granular phase.
I'm not sure if this applies, but it feels like it applies. She mentioned the anti-fragility concept, things getting stronger under stress. And I think all the DAOs, a lot of DAOs out there are based primarily on like, how can I get something for myself? And if it's all about self-interest, then when things are rattled, people turn on each other. If you're getting involved with a fundamental idea of self-sacrifice, which if you're going to have a true network state DAO, you're going to need some element of that. And honestly, it seems counterintuitive, but self-sacrifice and vulnerability is a kind of risking or fucking around, if you will.
Does that make it an ecological question? Do we have an ecology?
I can add like what we're doing. What we're doing is we're trying to move literally like hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of Bitcoin capital, which is just sitting passively on L1, into L2. And in terms of like, let's fuck around and find out like what happens. It can blow up, but it could also enable things like Bitcoin DAOs, funding for public goods like the medical research, because right now Bitcoin capital is sort of like locked. Like you can't really do much with it. And I really think it needs to become programmable because then Bitcoin DAOs and other things can take off.
This gentleman has a question.
Hey everyone, thank you for taking the time to speak today. My name's Aaron. I'm a student at the University of Oregon, and the blockchain club that I'm a part of participates in a lot of DAOs, but what we see is a lot of voter apathy. And so my question revolves around the balance between voter apathy and staking your vote and centralizing that to an extent. Is there a balance to be struck? Is that good, bad? Does a culture shift need to happen? Your thoughts?
I'll take it and then I'll pass it to you. Yeah, I think voter apathy is a big problem. And I mean, if we look at even participation in some DAOs today, I think on Uniswap, the average is about 6% of holders. On MakerDAO, somewhere between 6 and 7%. That's a big challenge. And I think one of the ways that we can address that is through a really good system for representative democracy. So if we think about, I'm going to bring this back to council, to our governance framework, but in council we have a module that you can plug in, which is called the Governance Steering Committee. And it allows you so there's some individuals that can be elevated to this council based on voting power that's been delegated to them. And then they can have certain certain powers and responsibilities that go with that. But the way to mitigate centralization of that voting power is to restrict how much can be delegated to that individual. So I think to tackle the voter apathy issue, you need representative democracy, and you need layers that can allow others to vote on your behalf, just like we have in our modern societies today. But then to mitigate the risk, you need a cap on how much can be delegated to that individual.
Yeah, so I thought about this quite a bit when you're thinking about how you could do a drug development project for the people. And I think we put too much emphasis on voting. I think there's two things here. I think it's voting and engagement. I think people can be heavily engaged in a site, a place where you learn about disease, for example, or drugs available, or where we can pursue those. And think about it. We only vote in this country, every couple of years, every 4 years. And there's voter apathy for sure, but people still vote, right? And they're not worrying about next week's vote because there is not, there really isn't a next week's vote. So I think this idea of voting being reflective of how engaged you are in a DAO is kind of not correct. I think you can build engagement other ways, not by voting. And I believe everyone should have one vote, period. Nobody should have more than one vote, much like the citizen of the United States has one vote. You don't get two, even if you worked on the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton got one vote as far as I know. So that's sort of where I'm at with the voting part. But I think that engagement is something else. Like, how can people help? How can you be involved? Tell your neighbors. If they have a problem with a disease, maybe try to help them come to a site where they can find something out that might help them. And then you can vote on it in the end. When we find something that might be effective treatment, everyone in the community can then have a vote. And that could be once every year. It could be once every 5 years. It just depends on how that goes. But I want to distribute that. So it's not like it's, a big risk. It's really distributed among many.
I want to, go ahead. I was going to say, I want to make sure we get as many questions in as we can. You want to say something real quick, Paul?
Yeah, just real quick. I think we do need to explore different models and get away from the 51% model of democracy. I think the idea of consensus is important. And I think you could actually have sort of monarchical situations where by consensus, you pick one person and you can only depose them by consensus. So the vote really, really matters, but it's infrequent.
Sir.
Hi, I'm a software engineer doing machine learning in healthcare, and one source of brittleness with DAOs that seems to be largely unaddressed is the question of legal liability. So you can have a really robust system internal to the users, but the question is where does the buck stop when it starts to interact with real governmental systems, and how do you structure governance to deal with those problems that are frankly existential?
I could take that.
I'm not touching that one.
I'm taking it.
I'll touch on it and I'll pass it off to you guys. But there's a lot of really interesting frameworks. Many are not super mature just yet, but legal frameworks that can be wrappers around a DAO structure. A DAO is really just a set of smart contracts. So many protocols that decentralize and have a DAO, but then have a foundation, which is the legal wrapper around the DAO. You can have, you can have a Cayman Foundation, which is a legal entity. You could have a Guernsey Trust, which is a purpose trust, which is often used for DAOs that are based out of the US. Like, for example, DYDX used a Guernsey Trust. There are UNAs, and there's other purpose trusts in other jurisdictions, like Bermuda, for example, which is really coming to the fore with a very comprehensive regulatory framework. And the reason that this could be a pretty contentious issue. I'm neutral on it, whether or not there's a legal framework or not. But I will say that many DAOs choose to have a legal wrapper because it allows you to address liability. For example, in a foundation setup, it's the board of directors that carry liability. In a trust, a purpose trust, it's the trustees. And having having a legal framework allows you to have legal admissibility in a court for decisions that are being made as well. And even things like tax obligations, paying employees, all of those things are important to have kind of a legal framework in place. Mind you, these things can be done without a legal framework, but it's just easier when that's in place. Yeah.
Couple questions on this side of the room.
Hi, I'm Kyoko. I'm with Security Alliance. I kind of had a question, kind of bringing it back to when we're talking about onboarding the general public. One of the big issues is they see this industry entirely as just a means of making money, whereas more it's an ideology in a lot of parts of it. And what, I don't know, do you think can be done, or what are you doing to reshift that focus and less about, because a lot of the space you have when you talk about whale types, people who are open about how much money they've made from it, but a lot of the benefit from this space and decentralization comes more to the general public, how it can benefit from it, and less monetary. So what can be done, and what do you intend on doing with that?
Always start with why. That's the most important thing. Why of anything is of Web3 is verifiability and transparency. It's the resilience of the tech stack, so it can't be shut down. It's verifiable truth sitting in immutable code because of consensus, and understanding the why of that. Because imagine if we had verifiable truth in Enron when their auditors were just squeezing through an audit, or literally committing outright fraud, or the ratings agencies leading up to the financial crisis. So you give real world cases on how this can prevent, or at least mitigate, some of the things that have truly brought the world down, brought people down, ruined people's lives. And Web3 tech on decentralized tech is something that can get rid of a lot of things that have happened in the past. So I always start with why. I reiterate, and I'm bringing real world cases, and it resonates. And that's what sticks. A story in someone's mind because it would affect their lives. It probably did affect their lives. And I never even talk about tokens unless it's about incentives and how it helps secure and scale the decentralized network. So I never talk about money at all.
Kevin, I feel like you have some answers on public benefit.
Yeah, so we're hoping to build local community regeneration toolkits where people who have software skills can bring UBI or quadratic funding or retroactive public goods funding to regenerate their local communities. And these tools work anywhere, whether you're in a Rust Belt state that's been hollowed out by globalization or somewhere that's in the developing world. And so using crypto for the public good in your community is something that we want to do to regenerate the communities worldwide and give them the sovereignty to do that. But it also has the side effect of onboarding people into crypto as well.
Sir.
Hey, I'm Thaddeus. I'm building a DeFi protocol. So my question is on the relationship between DAOs and the physical world. So assuming that any of your DAOs are successful enough, my assumption would be maybe people start meeting up in person, maybe eventually you open an office. So the question is twofold. First, is the eventual trajectory of DAOs to colonize pieces of the physical world? Kind of yes or no? And then if so, how would a DAO navigate the conflict between the physical centralization of geography, like a property or something like that, and decentralized governance? Like, how will DAOs interface with the physical world, either in each of your cases or in general? How do you envision that?
Who wants to go first?
I can give it a shot. I've been thinking about this one as well quite a bit, but for me, not really. Farmer DAO is not per se a DAO. When you get into that world and start trying to name it DAO, I think it's a decentralized autonomous, and I emphasize the word autonomous because that's one of the things I'm really striving to do in this community is make it autonomous, not like all the other DAOs I've seen, which are generally not autonomous. But it's not a corporation. It's not something I need to put onto an Inc. structure. What I've been sort of talking about recently is the idea of bringing for-profit, dare I say, centralized companies, bridging those to what I call decentralized technology. It's that aspect that really attracts me, because right now we fund pharmaceuticals through our treasury, about a third of it, quite frankly, which is enormous amount of money. And we don't have a say in that. That just goes. We don't vote on that. So the concept here is really simple. Create a separate treasury for doing efficient development of pharmaceuticals, which is unheard of, and then let the people get the reward, which is the drugs they need, and then also maybe get a reward to the community, not to the individual, going back to your point. So you're only getting the reward to the community, which is then shared to make more drugs. And an analogy is Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They got $3 billion on a 10% royalty for a drug they built with the help of a for-profit centralized company. So all I'm saying is, let's take that model and use decentralized technologies to do it in a better way, so we can have a say over pricing and a say over what drugs are actually made for what diseases. And if we make a killing somewhere, we put it back to work to make another drug. So
A killing,
that's really
not
cool.
in the literal sense, just to be clear.
So anyway,
Just real quick on that, I think Balaji in the network state sphere, Balaji talks about LARP before land, where you start really big and networky and you kind of eventually work your way towards concentration. What we've decided to do is not so much to reverse that, but at least to have a footprint. And decentralization is something I think that's people are used to working from home, traveling all over the country. You still vote even if you live in another country or whatever. So decentralization is there. We have a centralized place, a beautiful spot in the mountains of Wyoming, and it helps kind of energize the whole thing. And it doesn't mean we can't eventually have other satellite places.
Question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I wanted to make a question, and starting by talking about decentralization is talking about inclusion as well. And when a woman over there was talking about why she is not seeing more women up in the stage, which I love that you are there and I feel like represented. I do feel like we are missing a lot of women in this space. I wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't because I won a scholarship, and then like Consensus gave me permission of coming here. And actually my question goes like, as a member of a DAO called Hair DAO, which wants to empower more women, to see more women in the space, what is it that we can do to offer big organizations like yours to look at us and maybe make a partnership so that we can actually thrive into getting more women into the space, getting all the education that we need? Because of course we are in Gitcoin in the beta round, and we want that we want to get that patriotic fund. But as of the rest, I know that it's not only a one way. We don't want to just ask for funds, but so how can we get you interested into making like a partnership so that we can actually build more and be more?
Yeah. So I'm going to take this so everyone that doesn't have the plumbing I has can have a break. I consider this my panel, right? There's a little bit of erasure that's happening. Yes, I speak fluent woke because this is a topic I care about. I am actually one of the foremost experts on how corporate governance and DAOs overlap. That's my fucking jam. And I've got 20 years of experience in the space. And the one thing that I can say to other women to do this, because I've only ever worked in tech, is that you need to yell. The reason that I'm cussing, the reason that I'm loud, the reason I'm in a Vanna White gown is that we have a different socialization process. It just is. And the better and faster you can be at ignoring the fact that it exists, the more you're going to be seen. I'm on Twitter every single day, and I guess now I'm going to be on Blue Sky and Nostr and all of the other options because I want to hear from you. And these guys are louder than you. And they're louder because that's just whatever. We're dealing with gender. You can be in a non-anime, like get him a lady. You can pick. Yeah. There are so many ways to be noticed without the packaging of all the stupid semiotics of gender that I'm throwing at you. And all you need to do is go and ask individually, how do I get involved? How does Quadratic Funding offer an option so that you can come in and say that we care? And you can talk to me afterwards because I've got all sorts of experience. I am a licensed cosmetician. Yeah, see, but you didn't see that coming. So
You
the
go,
point
girl.
is that inclusion is about making sure you're included. I want to hear you. All right, anyone with a dick?
Yeah, kind of to that point.
Oh boy.
I yesterday ran into a woman here who has a DAO that is exclusively for wealthy Asian women. It's fupo.me. And I was stoked. Like, she's found her niche. She's turning it into a DAO. She's claiming her turf.
Yeah.
That is not the Wagon DAO's mission. We're actually male only. But if you want to, don't try to get in our space. Start your own thing. And I think it's
I will
awesome.
be your
that women-
first member.
There you go. I think it's awesome that women start their own projects.
Awesome. We have time for a couple more questions, gentlemen.
I thank you all. This might be an interesting follow-up to the last question, maybe somewhat adjacent to it. What would you say are the biggest ideological and philosophical blind spots among the various kind of dominant narratives in the Web3 communities? Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, that one's going to take a hot second. All right, blind spots. Kevin.
Do I want to do this? I do. I think that I would like to know why people on Bitcoin pejoratively call everything else an altcoin and a pre-mine. When Satoshi has more BTC than Vitalik has ETH, it feels like a total blind spot of the Bitcoin community. So someone explain that to me, please.
Spicy.
I'd say a blind spot is everyone calling everything a DApp and almost nothing is actually a DApp. Everything calling everything decentralized and almost nothing is completely decentralized. And that's okay because we're working towards it. But we need to put truth to the name so that we have a goal to hit, because we haven't even gotten close to our goal of true decentralization of tech, of ecosystems. And it's a massive blind spot because we haven't even close to one yet. We have a lot of fucking work to do. So
This is definitely the raunchiest session at Consensus, and probably the weirdest as well.
We
No-
did promise weird. We
Yes.
did.
Yes. Sir.
Hey, I'm Erez Aiden, an academic researcher. I'm really curious if the notion of decentralization in the Satoshi sense, right, that no one should have too much hash power, computational power, control in that sense, is that still relevant? Has that been achieved? I'm really curious what the panel's take about this.
I can comment on that. So I think I would say whenever people try to measure decentralization of any project or try to compare it, it's really about the definition of decentralization itself, right? Because you define what you're measuring, and depending on how you define it, something would score high or low or not, right? So, but I think what you're asking is like, does it matter? Answer is absolutely yes, right? Like if you're not actually decentralized, under stressful scenarios, like on a good day, you might get by and nothing bad happens. But decentralization matters when times are bad, when you're under attack, when some stressful thing is happening. I'll give you an example of Bitcoin. That when China banned Bitcoin mining, the network was actually able to recover very, very quickly because it is a decentralized network. Versus if it was a different network that was heavily dependent on some sort of entities that were Chinese entities, and as soon as the government shut down those entities, that network would have just vanished from the face of the planet.
Great example. I think we got time for one more. Kyoto, you had a follow-up?
I was just gonna say thank you and touch on it real quick as in my own founder and everything. I'm a founder. I'm not a woman founder. I'm a founder. Like as a Zoomer, I don't know, the millennial like girl power thing did the exact opposite. You excluded us, and true inclusivity is not special treatment. So there doesn't need to be more women there. It just needs to be more women speaking. Like as people, more people speaking. You know, if you have the idea, do it. Don't lead with this thing. You don't need special treatment. That's not inclusion.
Love it. Thank you.
That means everyone here, you are included in this. Come build.
That's a great way to end it. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you to all of you for your great questions.
Thanks for
and
having us.
especially Julie. Bravo.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. We're about to start the Pitch Fest, folks. So much energy in the room. This is the final Pitch Fest semi-final of the day. We've had 3. We've had 2. This is the 3rd, and 4 teams per semi-final. One person from each semi-final will go through to the finals tomorrow. Please join us. It's at 12:30 on the stage over there on the X stage. So I'd love, without further ado, I'd love to invite our judges up. So Maria Shen, Partner Electric Capital, please join. Patrick Chang, Managing Director Dispersion. Yay! And Richard Muirhead, Chairman and Managing Director Fabric. Please welcome our judges. Okay, now with inviting the teams up, Mariam from Breshna. Woohoo! Henry from Game. Amanda Metagood. Woohoo! And Stefan from Veritic AG. Welcome everyone, thank you so much. So what the plan now is, every team will, they'll pitch. It's a 3-minute pitch and then 3 minutes Q&A.